Yeah, he's Ben Gordon, but this is a Ben Gordon that no one knows because he's never been this person.
One of the keys was the shooters. How about this shooter has 40?
He played fast, but he played calm. He never seemed rushed and just flowed with the game. He was such a smooth scorer and made it look effortless with his underrated handles, sneaky hops, and dribble pull-ups. He could get to the hoop with his quickness or rain it down from beyond the arc. And Ben Gordon was never afraid of the big shot. He wasn't known for his defense and was likely best suited as a sixth man, as he could tire down the stretch. But that was because he exerted so much energy to get to his spots and entertain fans. He had one of the most memorable careers in UConn Huskies history, leading them to a national championship as a junior. Then would turn in half a decade of streaky yet exciting years with the Chicago Bulls, culminating in his legendary 2009 first-round performance versus Boston. But after leaving for Detroit, injury stole what made him the most effective, and he was never the same until his career was over at 32 years old. And this sudden and unexpected end to his time in the NBA would contribute to his subsequent struggles with mental health. But Ben Gordon's career is a perfect depiction of the highs and lows of professional athletes, and needs to be both appreciated and taken as example. Let's jog your memory. Born in London, England, Ben Gordon moved to Mount Vernon, New York at a young age, where by the time he was a teenager, he was starring for Mount Vernon High School, spending all 4 years on varsity and scoring nearly 1,800 points over his high school career. As a junior, Gordon would help the team to an undefeated 28-0 season, which included a New York Class A state championship. Then as a senior, he would average 24.1 points, 4.9 rebounds, 5.4 assists, and 3.6 steals, as the team would make it to the state semifinals. And by this time, Gordon was a top 40 national recruit and would end up committing to UConn, where he would become a key contributor in one of the greatest periods of Huskies basketball. On top of signing Gordon, the Huskies had also got a commitment from big man Emeka Okafor, as these two would have significant roles on a team led by Caron Butler, with Gordon even finishing as the team's second leading scorer and distributor this year, while coming off the bench, and he was also the team's top three-point shooter. He would have some big games throughout the season, such as hitting 5 three-pointers in a road win over 10th-ranked Arizona. Then a couple weeks later, he would score 10 straight first-half points in an overtime loss to St. John's. And then in one of the final games of the year, on the road against Georgetown, he would hit the go-ahead three-pointer, which marked the third of 6 straight wins for the Huskies to end the regular season, as they would finish as the 23rd ranked team in the nation with a 21-6 record. 2002 would be the beginning of Gordon's Big East tournament dominance throughout his time at UConn, as in the quarterfinals versus Villanova, he poured in 23 points and hit the go-ahead three-pointer in the final seconds to push the Huskies through to the semis to take on Notre Dame, where he would again be a standout, finishing with 19 points in a 5-point win. He cooled off in the championship game versus Pitt as he scored just 8 points, but the Huskies would outlast the Panthers in double overtime to win the championship and guarantee their spot in the NCAA tournament. Gordon would have a good tournament debut in a win over Hampton, as he would record 10 points and 3 steals, which would set up a second-round matchup with NC State. However, Gordon would be held scoreless in this game, yet would still record 2 steals. The Sweet 16 would be his best, as he finished with 12 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in a defeat of Southern Illinois. But in the Elite 8, he would have just 8 points, on 1 of 7 shooting, in a loss to the eventual national champion Maryland Terrapins, as Gordon's freshman year ended with him averaging about 12.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. As a sophomore, Gordon would receive a much more prominent role in the offense. With Butler gone, Gordon became a full-time starter, splitting time between point guard and shooting guard, and overall being given a lot more opportunity to create with the ball, as he led the team in scoring and dished the most total assists, while also being a top 10 scorer in the conference, and one of its best long-range threats, as he would be named second team All-Big East. Gordon would hit double figures in all but one game and have 17 games with at least 20 points. He would have his first career double-double in a December 1st win over Sacred Heart, when he put up 31 points and 10 assists. And in late January, he would drop 32 against Miami on the road. Yet that game would end in a loss, as even though the Huskies featured a top 20 offense, their defense was well below average, leading to a solid 19-8 record. Yet the team finished the regular season unranked. Gordon again went off in the quarterfinals of the Big East tourney, this year against Seton Hall, as he would drop 25 points in a win. He would have just 12 points against Syracuse in the semis, but UConn would still win by double digits. However, Pittsburgh would get their revenge for last year, as they would defeat UConn in the championship, with Gordon dropping just 13 points. But with UConn now sitting at 21-9, they would still get an invite to the big dance. Gordon had a modest first round with just 14 points on 4 of 12 shooting in a close defeat of BYU, but he would then explode in round 2 in a defeat over Stanford, as he finished with a game-high 29 points while going 4 of 5 from deep, and would also add 5 rebounds and 4 assists. The Sweet 16 brought Texas, and although Gordon finished with 16 points, UConn would lose a close one to end their year, as Gordon's sophomore season ended with him averaging about 19.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. UConn was led by Gordon and Okafor going into the 04 season, yet were a deep roster, stacked full of future NBA talent, and would begin the season as the top-ranked team in the nation. Gordon would again act as their top scorer and one of the conference's best scorers, while hitting over 100 three-pointers over the course of the season, en route to being named first team all-conference. And in just UConn's second game of the year versus Nevada, Gordon would go for a career-high 37 points in a win. But then they would lose badly to Georgia Tech in just their 4th game. About a month later, Gordon would record his first career triple-double in a win over Iona, which was one win of an 11-game streak. They would lose to UNC before kicking off conference play with a defeat of Pittsburgh, and overall would go 12-4 in conference play to finish second in the Big East, as they would enter the Big East tournament with a 24-6 record and ranked as the number 7 team in the nation. But they also entered the tournament without Okafor, who was dealing with muscle spasms in his back, so the Huskies would need a lot out of Gordon. UConn would begin the tournament against Notre Dame, and Gordon would go off, as he would pour in 29 points and lead the Huskies to an 8-point victory, setting up a semifinals matchup with Villanova. And once again, Gordon would go for 29 points in a blowout defeat.
His drive to the basket, and you see right there, look at 3 guys come out on him, 2 guys with their hands up, and he still is.
As the Huskies would advance to the conference championship game for the 3rd straight year, and would take on Pittsburgh for the 3rd straight year, as now Okafor was back. Yet Gordon continued on his tear, as he would record 23 points, and the Huskies would get revenge for last year and win by 3, as Gordon had set a Big East tournament record with 81 total points, en route to being named tournament MVP.
Those first 2 days, I mean, my big man was out, so I know it was time for me to step up, you know.
But now it was time for the real tournament, as UConn was a favorite going into the big dance. Gordon would struggle in round 1 versus Vermont, as even though he had 14 points and 8 rebounds, he shot just 5 of 17 from the field. Yet UConn would win easily. Round 2 wasn't much better for Gordon, as again, although he scored 18 points, he shot 4 of 13 from the field in another convincing win over DePaul. The Sweet 16 brought Vanderbilt, and Gordon's shots started to fall, as he would go 7 of 16 from the field and scored 20 points, along with 9 rebounds and 5 assists, as the Huskies advanced to take on Alabama. And even though Gordon had not really been able to find his shot up to this point, it didn't stop him from shooting, and it paid off in the Elite 8, as Gordon would go for a game-high 36 points on 11 of 19 shooting in a win to propel the Huskies to the Final Four. Gordon cooled off in this matchup against Duke, still scoring a game-high 18 points, but shooting below 42%. Yet the Huskies would hold on and outlast the Blue Devils by 1 point, as they were now heading to the national championship to take on the Georgia Tech team who had beat them over 4 months earlier. Gordon would have 21 points in this game, with a lot of those coming from the free throw line, but from the floor, his shot again just wasn't falling, as he would shoot below 30% from the field. However, the Huskies would hold the Yellow Jackets to 38% shooting, en route to winning the 2nd national championship in program history, as Gordon's junior year wrapped up with him averaging about 18.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. Gordon still had a year of eligibility left, but had shown to be one of the best players in the nation, and although his tournament wasn't perfect, he still was looked at as one of college basketball's best scorers and shot creators, and was coming off a historic conference tournament performance and a national championship win. So Gordon felt like it was the best time to take the next step, as along with Okafor, they would declare for the 04 NBA draft.
With the 3rd pick in the 2004 NBA draft, the Chicago Bulls select Ben Gordon from the University of Connecticut.
One pick after his UConn teammate, Gordon was the third overall pick of the Chicago Bulls, making him the first shooting guard that the Bulls had taken third overall since Michael Jordan, already placing lofty expectations on the undersized Gordon. Gordon would choose to wear number 7 in Chicago, as his usual number 4 was retired for Jerry Sloan, so he would combine his third overall selection status with his usual number to get 7. The Bulls hadn't done much since Jordan's retirement, but they now had built a young core filled with high potential players, which included the big man duo of Eddie Curry and Tyson Chandler, as well as second-year point guard Kirk Hinrich. And on top of Gordon, the Bulls had also drafted Chris Duhon and Luol Deng. Similar to his beginnings at UConn, Gordon would occupy a sixth-man role during his rookie season, due to his ability to create his own offense off the bench. And that proved to be a great decision by Scott Skiles. But it didn't look like that in the beginning, as over the team's first 17 games, Gordon and the whole Bulls team were struggling, as Gordon's shot wasn't falling, and the Bulls weren't winning, starting the season at just 3-14. But Gordon would turn it up after that, upping his scoring by nearly 6 points per game, and acting as the team's third leading scorer on the year. He would hit double figures in 61 games, and would even record 4 games with at least 30. And soon after their poor start, Chicago won 5 straight, then would go 13-3 in January, and would end the season by going 15-5 over their final 20, which included a 9-game win streak, as they would recover to finish with their best record since Jordan's retirement at 47-35, and would make a return to the playoffs. And Gordon would make history by becoming the first rookie to win Sixth Man of the Year, as he would also finish second to Okafor in Rookie of the Year voting. So the Bulls were set to take on Washington in the playoffs, and this series would see Gordon have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Bulls fans would like what they saw in Game 1, as Gordon came out and dropped 30 points on nearly 58% shooting, while adding 2 blocks in his playoff debut, as the Bulls got the win.
Gordon, and look at Chandler with the little screen. Gordon, Mr. Fourth Quarter, getting heated up here.
He wouldn't replicate that performance in Game 2, but he also played a lot less minutes, yet would still manage a respectable 14 points, as the Bulls won again and were heading to Washington with a 2-0 lead. But Game 3 would be forgettable for Gordon, as he scored just 8 points while going 2 for 9 from the field in a blowout loss. But then Game 4 was a nightmare, as Gordon again had 8 points, but this time would make just 1 of his 13 shot attempts, in another loss. He would get back on track in Chicago for Game 5, as he would score 27 points on 10 of 19 shooting, while adding 4 rebounds and 5 assists. Yet the Bulls would lose a close one. Then Game 6 would see Gordon attempt a single shot and go scoreless in another loss, as the Bulls dropped 4 straight to end the series, with Gordon's rookie year seeing him average about 15 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Gordon came back in 06 with improved conditioning, and would average over 6.5 minutes more than last season, with his bump in playing time also being due to him spending a lot of time in the starting lineup this season. The Bulls had lost their leading scorer from last year in Eddie Curry, but Gordon would up his scoring this season, as he ended the year as the Bulls' top scorer. He was the team's 6th man over the first third of the year, and while he was giving them solid scoring, his overall efficiency was lacking, although he was shooting over 42% from deep. But with the Bulls sitting at 12-16, Skiles decided to make Gordon a starter for the rest of the season, and it paid off, as over his final 54 games, Gordon was scoring more efficiently on over 5 more points per game, as he saw production increase across the board. Overall, Gordon would hit double figures in 63 games, including 8 games with at least 30, and he was proving to be one of the league's most dangerous deep threats, as he would hit a career-high 9 3-pointers on 2 occasions, with the most impressive coming on April 14th versus Washington, when Gordon tied an NBA record by draining 9 3-pointers without a miss in a win over the Wizards, which was the third of 6 straight wins to end the season, as Chicago finished with a 41-41 record and got a first-round matchup with Miami. Gordon would have a tough time matching up with Miami's Dwayne Wade, and while he had his struggles, overall he would have a good series. He came out in Game 1 and dropped 35 points on 12 of 22 shooting in a close loss, but he wasn't as effective in Game 2, with just 13 points on 5 of 16 shooting. However, he did add 4 rebounds and 4 assists, but the Bulls still lost and fell behind 0-2. However, Gordon and the Bulls would handle business back in Chicago, as Game 3 would see him drop a team-high 24 points while draining 3 shots from deep in a blowout win, Then in Game 4, he recorded an efficient 23 points, while hitting 4 shots from beyond the arc, as Chicago would even the series. But back in Miami, Gordon had just 10 points on 3 of 16 shooting in a loss. Then the Heat wrapped it up in Chicago 2 nights later, with Gordon scoring 21, yet shooting just 7 of 18 from the field, as his second season ended with him averaging about 17 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. But 2007 would see Gordon take a step forward and turn in one of the best seasons of his career. The Bulls made one of the biggest moves of the offseason by signing the reigning Defensive Player of the Year in Ben Wallace, as they would feature one of the league's best defenses in 2007. But their offense would be slightly improved as well, thanks in no small part to a career year from Gordon, as the third-year shooting guard would put up career highs in scoring, rebounding, and field goal percentage, while shooting over 41% from deep. But again, it didn't start great. His first 6 games of the season saw him really struggle in a starting role, so Skiles would again begin bringing him off the bench. And over his next 31, he would be one of the league's best second-unit scorers on very respectable efficiency, as the Bulls were sitting at 20 and 17, when Skiles would reinsert Gordon into the starting lineup for the remainder of the year, as Gordon's numbers would remain quite similar to his bench numbers over the second half of the season, with his most memorable performance coming in a March 4th defeat of Milwaukee, when he dropped a career-high 48 points in a comeback overtime win, which saw him score 20 of those in the fourth quarter alone.
Gets him into a play they can score on. Ben Gordon pulls up at the elbow, tough shot.
Marking one of his 15 games this season with at least 30 points. And by season's end, Gordon was the Bulls' leading scorer, and Chicago had finished 1 win short of their first 50-win season in a decade. But their 49-33 record would still get them a first-round matchup versus the defending champion Miami Heat. And while the Heat had been dysfunctional all season, no one expected what would happen next. Gordon would have the best playoff series of his career up to that point, averaging over 25 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists, while also adding over a steal per game. He recorded his first career double-double in a Game 1 win with 24 points and 11 assists. Then in Game 2, he went for 27, 7, and 5, while going 5 of 8 from deep. As the Bulls were heading to Miami with a 2-0 lead, he had another 27-point outing in Game 3, with 11 of those points coming by way of free throw. And now Chicago was 1 win away from a sweep. Then in Game 4, although Gordon shot just 6 of 16 from the field, he still led the Bulls with 24 points, as they won easily, to become the first team in history to sweep the defending champs in the first round, setting up a second-round matchup with Detroit. This series was much different, as after 3 games, the Bulls found themselves on the brink of being swept, as Gordon was struggling, averaging 12 points on 28% shooting. He would average 22.5 over his next 2 on about 52% shooting, as the Bulls avoided the sweep and pushed it to 6. But Detroit would close it out at home to end Chicago's year, as Gordon's season had ended with him averaging about 21.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. But the 08 season would see Gordon return to his 6th-man role. There was optimism in Chicago after their second-round playoff appearance, but the team would deal with injuries to Deng this season, as well as big personnel changes, as the Wallace experiment came to an end after about a season and a half, when he was traded to Cleveland in February, and Chicago would have a lot of coaching change. Gordon began the season as a starter, and while his numbers were solid, he again was struggling to hit his shots, and the Bulls were struggling to get wins, starting the year at 9 and 16 before Scott Skiles was fired. Then after 1 game with assistant Pete Myers filling in, they promoted assistant Jim Boylan to head coach for the remainder of the season, and one of the first things he did was return Gordon to the role of 6th man, where he would stay for the rest of the year. And at this point, it seemed like this was the role Gordon was best suited for, as he was a player who used a lot of energy to get to his spots and get his points, and would gas out as the game went on. But in more controlled minutes, he was able to up his numbers and improve his efficiency, as overall he would have 63 games in double figures and 8 with at least 30, and would again lead the Bulls in scoring. And after spending the majority of the season coming off the bench, he would finish top 5 in 6th man of the year voting. However, with the injuries to Deng and the Wallace trade, Chicago's defense suffered, and they would go just 24 and 32 under Boylan, to finish at 33 and 49 and miss the playoffs for the first time in Gordon's career, as Gordon ended the season with averages of about 18.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. But the relationship between Gordon and Chicago was beginning to sour. Gordon was a restricted free agent and over the offseason was looking for big money. Yet not many teams were willing to offer the streaky combo guard the kind of money that he was looking for, and he would reportedly even decline a 5-year, $50 million offer from Chicago over the summer, as he would ultimately sign a 1-year qualifying offer with the Bulls shortly before the 2009 season. But with Chicago offering a more than fair contract and Gordon still declining, it seemed that his days with the organization would be numbered. The Bulls had received the first overall pick in the NBA draft and used it to select Memphis point guard Derrick Rose, and would see further improvement from second-year big man Joakim Noah. Deng would again miss significant time, but the Bulls looked to have one of the league's highest-scoring backcourts, after new head coach Vinny Del Negro would reinsert Gordon as the starter for the entire season, and he would perform well, as he would average over 20 points as Chicago's leading scorer yet again, while tying his career-high shooting percentage. And with a point guard who could push the ball and penetrate, Gordon found himself with plenty of open looks from deep, as he would take and make a career high in three-pointers this season, while shooting over 40% from deep for the 4th consecutive year. He would hit double figures in 78 games and would record a season-high point total when he dropped 43 points while draining 8 threes in a March 11th loss to Miami. And while Chicago wasn't a great team, they would recover from a slow start to finish with a .500 record at 41-41, which would get them a first-round matchup with the defending champion Boston Celtics, where Gordon would turn in one of the great playoff performances of the 2000s. There is an asterisk beside this series due to the Celtics being without Kevin Garnett. However, Gordon's series was still very impressive. Game 1 in Boston didn't start well for him, as after 3 quarters, he had just 8 points. But in the 4th quarter, he would score 12 points to keep the Bulls in it and force overtime, where they would prevail to surprisingly steal Game 1. Gordon came out in Game 2 on a mission, as he would score 7 points in the 1st quarter, then 10 more in the 2nd. Then he turned it up even higher come the 2nd half, as he dropped 11 in the 3rd and then 14 in the 4th, and throughout the whole game had been in a memorable shootout with Boston's Ray Allen. Yet Gordon's playoff career high of 42 would top Allen's 30-point performance, and it looked like Game 2 would also need overtime, after Gordon hit the game-tying jumper with about 12 seconds left. But Allen's final 3 points would come in the final 2 seconds.
It's on Rondo. Allen over Noah. Oh! Ray Allen has done it again!
As his three-pointer would be the difference, and now the teams were tied going back to Chicago. Gordon lost his touch in Game 3 as he turned in just 15 points on 5 of 13 shooting in a blowout loss, but he would come back with a more efficient 22 points in Game 4, while hitting a clutch 4th quarter go-ahead shot, then hitting a 3 in the final seconds of the 1st overtime to force a 2nd overtime.
Quick. Back out to Gordon. Gordon looking. Gordon for 3. Bang! Ben Gordon ties the game!
Where the Bulls would take the game to again even the series. Gordon had 26 points but shot just 6 of 21 from the field in a 2-point overtime loss in Game 5, then fouled out of Game 6 after an inefficient 12 points. Yet the Bulls held on to force a Game 7. Gordon would shoot just 7 of 23 from the field in this game, yet would lead all scorers with 33, as he hit 4 3-pointers and made all 15 of his free throws. But Chicago couldn't pull off the upset, losing by 10, as Gordon's season ended with him averaging about 20.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. But Gordon was an unrestricted free agent going into this offseason, and the Bulls didn't want 2 score-first guards in their backcourt, so they made the decision to build around Rose. However, Gordon wasn't searching long for a new team, as with another 5-year deal worth upwards of $50 million on the table, this time being offered by Detroit, Gordon would accept it and join the Pistons, but he would never again come close to the success he had in Chicago. Gordon would join a Pistons team coming off one of their best stretches in franchise history, yet one that had recently ended, as they were no longer a contender in the East. They featured the backcourt of Rodney Stuckey and Richard Hamilton, and once again Gordon would be used as a 6th man for the majority of the season. But he had began as a starter, and was actually putting up numbers similar to last season over his first 15 games. But he would start being hampered by an ankle injury in early December, which would lead to him missing 20 games over the rest of the season, and returning to a bench role, where his numbers and efficiency would suffer. And the rest of his season would be defined by inconsistent play, as after scoring at least 20 in 9 of his first 15 games, he would do it just 9 more times this season. However, he would score at least 20 in his final 4 games of the year. which included his season high of 39 in an April 9th defeat of Miami. But overall, Detroit was no longer the team they once were, as they went 27-55 and missed the playoffs for the first time in a decade, with Gordon's season seeing him average about 14 points, 2 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Shortly after the season, Gordon would undergo surgery to remove bone spur fragments from his left ankle, and with an entire offseason to recover, he was expected to be healthy and ready come the 2011 season. And he would be, as he played in all 82 games this year, primarily as a bench player. But with the Pistons adding Tracy McGrady and rookie big man Greg Monroe, there weren't as many shot opportunities for Gordon, as his 9.4 attempts would be a career low up to that point. And even though he was scoring with improved efficiency, his scoring was also at a career low, on a Pistons offense that was in the bottom third of the league for scoring. And with an average defense, they would improve, but not by much, as they finished with a 30-52 record and again missed the playoffs, with Gordon's year seeing him average about 11 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. The lockout-shortened season had seen the Pistons add more backcourt scoring after selecting Brandon Knight, as they now possess 3 score-first combo guards, with Gordon being the oldest, so it seemed that he may eventually become expendable. However, this season would be his most efficient since leaving Chicago. He would split time between the starting lineup and the bench, and upped his scoring from last year, but his ankle issues had stolen some of the quickness and speed that made him so dangerous, and he began relying on the outside shot more and more, and further injury problems would come his way early in the season, as he would deal with shoulder tendinitis. And even though he wasn't driving nearly as much, he was still putting up points with his shooting, as he would hit nearly 43% of his shots from beyond the arc, and would explode for 45 points in a March 21st loss to Denver, where for the second time in his career, he would drain 9 3-pointers without a miss. But the Pistons were now one of the league's lowest scoring teams, and would finish with just a 25-41 record, again missing the playoffs, as Gordon's year ended with him averaging about 12.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. But Gordon's time in Detroit would end over the offseason. In late June, the Pistons packaged Gordon in a trade to Charlotte for Corey Maggette, as Gordon joined a young Bobcats team as a veteran, even though he was still just 29 years old himself. Charlotte was coming off a historically bad season and led by second-year point guard Kemba Walker, and with Walker being a score-first guard, Gordon would act as relief off the bench, as this would be the first season of his career where he didn't start a single game. And while he provided the Bobcats with good scoring, hitting double figures in 41 games, he would also shoot below 41%, and with his defense never being his strong suit and his injuries slowing him down, he was seeing his value in the league diminish, on a Bobcats team who finished at just 21-61 and missed the playoffs, as Gordon averaged about 11 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But going forward, Gordon would see his career fall off a cliff after hitting 30. Gordon would barely see the court during the 2014 season, logging consecutive DMPs on multiple occasions and getting very limited playing time when he did see the floor. And with the Bobcats sitting at 35-38 in late March, they would waive Gordon with less than 10 games left in the season. And due to it being past the March 1st deadline, Gordon was not able to sign on with another playoff team, as his season was over after playing 19 games, which saw him average about 5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. Gordon would sign a 2-year deal with Orlando prior to the 2015 season, and while he would see more game action, he would see his minutes and role decrease as the season went on, as although he would appear in 56 games, he would not appear in any of the team's final 10 games, as they finished with a 25-57 record and missed the playoffs, with Gordon's season seeing him average about 6 points, 1 rebound, and 1 assist per game. Shortly after the season, Gordon was waived by Orlando, and a few months later would sign with Golden State, but he would be released before the regular season, which would be his final time on an NBA roster. He would make a comeback attempt in 2017 with the D-League's Texas Legends, but would never get a call-up. And sadly after this, his life took some dark turns. Gordon's struggles with mental health would become apparent soon after his time in the D-League, as over a 6-month period in 2017, he would be arrested multiple times and hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, with his offenses becoming more violent as the year went on. In 2020, he would become more transparent about his struggles with bipolar disorder since his retirement from the NBA, and the low points he had reached after losing the game that had been his entire life for over a decade. And you wouldn't hear much about Gordon for the next couple years. But then in 2022 and 2023, he was again in the headlines for some unfortunate reasons. And while his actions aren't excusable, it's hard to see the sad truth that some athletes have to deal with when they no longer have the game that was their whole identity, which came with constant routine and monitoring, and one can only hope that things improve for Ben Gordon.
It's more medical than it is like he's a bad guy. He's not a bad guy.
Ben Gordon wasn't the best player, and he won't be mentioned in any all-time great conversations when speaking about the NBA, but his game was beautiful to watch. During his time at UConn and with the Chicago Bulls, he was just a pure hooper, and although he had plenty of inconsistent performances, you knew on any night he could give you the most effortless 30 points you'd ever seen, as he just glided through the defense and made every shot look so natural, no matter how difficult it was. He can be talked about as an all-timer in the Big East, and was one of college basketball's most fun players to watch throughout his 3 seasons as a Husky. Then in entering the NBA, he had some lofty expectations and would give Bulls fans a lot to be frustrated about, but even more to cheer about, over his first 5 years, where he seemed to play his best if he was matched up with the defending champs. He left for the money in Detroit, as many would, yet only saw his career slowly decline after that. But it needs to be mentioned how much of what made him effective was stolen by his ankle problems. And if you're an undersized player, you can't afford to lose your speed and quickness. And while the ending of his career was sad, it's been even worse to see what's become of his life post-NBA. And while Ben Gordon's career may not be as appreciated as it should be in retrospect, he had the type of game that you had to stop and watch in the moment. But that's it for today's episode on Ben Gordon. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on his Chicago teammate, or this one on a player he spent a short time with in Charlotte. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.